and welcome to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. My name is Jesse, and I'll be your host. So on today's episode, we're going to keep the spooky train moving right along, and we're going to be discussing 1996's Scream, written by Kevin Williamson, directed by Wes Craven. It's a very known horror movie. It spawned a bunch of sequels. It's a very influential horror film, as we'll discuss a little bit later in the podcast. And it is one of my favorite horror movies. I do, of course, in the last episode, I talked about how much I love Carrie, 1976, and that still stands. But this is also a favorite of mine as well. I think it's just really smartly written. I think it, launched a lot of careers for people, which is awesome. And overall, I still think it's really great, at least in my personal view. So, plan for podcast is that we'll go over some figures as we normally do. I'll go into some critical response quotes from the time and, other people talking about it. Then we'll go into some production history information. Might even learn a little bit about horror movies as a whole. And then we'll move into a plot summary where I talk about the film and what happens in it. And then we'll wrap up. So let's get started. So Scream was released December 20th, 1996. It was written by Kevin Williamson, directed by Wes Craven, produced by Kathy Conrad and Carrie Woods. It was also executive produced by the Weinstein brothers. Blah. But anyway, and released by Dimension Films. This budget was about $14 to $16 million. I've seen both of those figures out there. And the box office was $103.7 million in the US and Canada. And then it ended up making $173 million as a worldwide gross. We're looking at a Rotten Tomatoes score of 79% on the tomato meter and a 79% audience score as of whenever I got that information a couple days ago. We have an IMDb score of 7.4 out of 10 and a Letterboxd score of 4 out of 5. I've pulled some critical response quotes from some critics about what they think about Scream. So we got Stephen Hunter from the Baltimore Sun. Hey, Baltimore Sun. And this was released October 6, 2013. Stephen Hunter states, "The movie's only wrinkle is that it is, in a crude fashion, postmodernist. Pardon me while I alert the media." So he thinks he's like real, sassy. Then you have Jeff Weiss from the Desert Times from Salt Lake City, who said pre the 2000s, I guess, stated, "First, it's not scary, and second, after seeing it, you may scream at yourself for wasting your time and money." And then we have Bob Stevens from the San Francisco Examiner, who stated, "In an age that is nearly devoid of talented horror movie directors, it has become tiresome having to consider the inconsiderable, aggravating to search for rationales for the haphazardly assembled creations of people like Craven." So, when talking about cult classic cinema, since that's what this podcast is all about, something like Scream, I do consider to be a kind of cult classic of cinema, because, when it comes down to it, like horror itself tends to have cult following as a whole. So I definitely will cover different horror movies. I'm planning to do so in the next coming weeks, especially since around this time that this will be releasing, it'll be around October time. Spooky season, so why not release some spooky episodes about spooky movies? But this movie has been referenced so much in our pop culture. It made a fair amount of money. It spawned all these sequels. There was an MTV show made about it. Of course, it's kind of in our zeitgeist and in everything. In the mainstream a lot of the time, of course, they had a new movie release in 2022. They're making the new one, Scream 6, I guess, now. And there's just been a whole lot of news on it. But I still think it's very important that, this movie is there's a certain level of respect I have for it. And it's just one that I can kind of watch whenever. Any of these movies, really, like these Scream movies, I am down for at any time. Even if I maybe don't like one as much, for my own reasons, I will always sit down and have a good time with watching them. So before we hop into like a production history of what happened with Scream and also like plot summary and all that, I think it's important to take the time to talk a little bit about what the state of horror movies was in the mid-90s by this time that Scream came out. And to do that, we'll go over a little bit of horror history. delivered by yours truly, to kind of just contextualize where had horror movies come from, and also just like kind of what did they look like business wise, and then I think that'll help kind of contextualize why Scream itself as a movie was just a real good revitalization of the genre as a whole. So I didn't go to school for film or film studies or any of this stuff, but just as a fan of this genre and doing a whole lot of research and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to go through this as quick and as concisely as I can. So let's start. So if we look at movies like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu that came out of Germany back in the 1920s, again, I don't think those came over right away to America, but those were like German expressionist films that had that kind of horror edge to them, and are still kind of scary to this day, honestly. So you have those kinds of films. Then in the 30s, in the U.S., we had the Universal monster movies. So we're looking at, Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, what have you with those. But again, those were movies that were kind of based off of like book here or there, and again they were brought to the screen by Universal, and they're still known to this day, of course, and that was kind of a good basis for what we know of as horror. The Old Dark House also comes to mind as well, which was a really good movie actually. Then in the 40s you have like The Wolfman, you have Cat People by Val Lewton, and you got a couple of those kinds of movies coming out as well, and then in the 50s you have like creature features, especially. So you have like The Thing from Another World that came out, which was, I believe, a Howard Hawks movie, but it then got turned into The Thing in 1982 with John Carpenter. He remade The Thing from Another World, but you also had movies like Them, which is about like these giant killer ants. You also had like The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and again you had these kinds of films that were using the other. It was like a kind of thinly veiled sort of allegory of communism and all that. But then when we look at modern horror as we kind of know it today, we can really look and pinpoint, in 1960 you had Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho come out, and that was a really good film for its time, and it's still a really great film, but that was like the proto slasher, if you will, because you didn't know who it was, you didn't know who was killing who, and you had the whole like you think that Marion Crane is gonna live through the whole movie, and she gets killed in the first half hour, and then it's kind of a mystery, and then you find out at the end who did it. So I think that really kind of cemented like okay, this is important, and this is like horror, quote unquote. But then you also had other movies, you have The Haunting from Robert Wise, which was based off of a book by Shirley Jackson, called The Haunting of Hill House, which then obviously, nowadays got turned into a Netflix series, but these are kind of the roots that we're looking at. We also have movies like Rosemary's Baby from Roman Polanski, but it was based off of Ira Levin's book, and so, that's also a really transgressive movie for its time, horrifying, of course, because, Mia Farrow has the devil's baby pretty much. And then you have Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero, which gave us the archetype and like pretty much the seminal zombie movie of what we know of as zombies today. So that was also very influential as well, and it was very important. There's also, of course, the fact that like, everyone dies in that movie too. The main character, the main protagonist in the film is a black man. There's also talk of that as well you could get into. Dwayne Jones like just kills it in that role. It's so good. So that's what you have with the 60s, especially since there was a lot going on culturally within the 60s as well. What with civil rights at the time. You also had like you had like Stonewall at the end of that for, gay rights and all. The women's movement, would be coming in soon. So women could empower themselves more. And then the 70s, you got a whole lot of directors kind of starting. George A. Romero had started with Night of the Living Dead and a little bit of movies before that. But, you got like our boy Wes Craven, who directed this film, it's Scream. He made Last House on the Left. He made Hills Have Eyes in 1970. I think 6 or 5 or something like that. You have him. You have Tobe Hooper making the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You have, Bob Clark, who made Black Christmas in Canada. David Cronenberg, who's, playing up in Canada too, and he made like Shivers. He would then end up making, The Fly and, a couple other movies, and body horror, especially Videodrome, all that. So then you have all that. And then you have a little movie called Halloween from 1978, starring Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance, directed by John Carpenter, music by John Carpenter, all that. And that was a really important film for that time as well, because that really set a bound imitators, which in a way Scream also did after that came out. But Halloween was really kind of that one movie where it did really well, and then it kind of set into motion people trying to imitate Halloween. So that's what you have with the 70s there. And then in the 80s, you have this huge boom of horror films coming out. This, I think, had to do, who knows, maybe with the culture. I was not there, so I don't completely know. But, you're going through presidential change. You got Ronald Reagan, who was not exactly the most popular of presidents. So a lot going on in that culture at the time. But I also think it came from the advent of home video. For the kind of first time, people could have a VCR in their house, and they could actually rent and buy VHS tapes, and they could actually watch stuff at home instead of going out to the movies. It used to be that, a movie would come out, you would go see it if you could, and then it would kind of not be released until maybe if it got re-released in theaters, but there was no way that it could be tangible in your hands. And then when VHS came along, that solved that problem. So now you have people who can actually curate and own this stuff, so that they are able to have this fandom, which I think also came with fandom too. It made it that much deeper, where people could have that, and it's still even that to this day. People talking and wanting to hold on to physical media, especially. But yeah, the 80s had a huge boom of all kinds of stuff. You have, I would say, kind of a big one was, if anything, you have a continuation to Halloween with Halloween 2, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, and, the subsequent sequels. But then you had Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, written by our boy Wes Craven, directed by him. And that, brought us Freddy Krueger. You also had Friday the 13th in 1980. That was, an offshoot of Halloween, just set in a summer camp, but it did well enough where all these sequels came out, and they were pretty cheap to make, and you could get a pretty good return on your investment. So the 80s was kind of the heyday for horror. If you want to find out more about this information, or a little bit more detail information, you can watch In Search of Darkness Part 1 and 2. The last time I checked, they're streaming on Shudder, or if you have AMC Plus, you may be able to get them in case you don't have Shudder, because sometimes their content overlaps, because AMC owns Shudder. But it's a documentary. It's like hours and millions of hours long, but they both delve into year by year different horror movies that came out at those years, and I think it's a really nice comprehensive guide to all these movies. And then we get to the 90s, where at this point, horror was kind of seen as this sort of cliched, played out kind of genre. There weren't a whole lot of new horror directors out there coming in, through the cut. So you have some nice little gems here and there, but generally, even like these franchises that at one time were perfectly profitable. So if we use the just examples we had just then, Friday the 13th, they had The Final Friday, Jason Goes to Hell, which did not do very well at all. Didn't do good financially. It was panned by critics. You have Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, coming out in, I think, 91, I believe, with Breckin Meyer. That didn't do very good either. And then New Nightmare, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was actually kind of interesting. It was a little bit of a kind of proto Scream film because it was very meta, very into Heather Langenkamp plays her a version of herself in the movie. Robert Englund plays a version of himself in the movie, and it's actually not a bad movie, but it got panned by critics. Financially, I don't think it did as great as they wanted it to. Okay, so you have that, and then you have Halloween. You have The Curse of Michael Myers, which came out in '95 with our good old boy Paul Rudd. Again, didn't do very well. The Jamie Lloyd ones I think did all right. That was Halloween 4 and 5, but a lot of the other ones didn't really do the best before Scream came along. And then that's not even like mentioning all the other stuff, the theatrical releases, of course. But you got like Hellraiser. By this point they had Hellraiser 3, and then Hellraiser 4, I think. I'm trying to remember. It was Bloodline, I think, was 4, and then 3, it was Hell on Earth or something like that. I'm not like the hugest Hellraiser person, but again, those sequels didn't exactly do great. Yeah, you just have a lot of different, examples of these movies that are coming out. They're horror films. They're just not doing good. They're not doing good at all. And again, there's some gems. You have Candyman in 1992. That did all right. That did pretty good. But even the sequel, again, didn't do that great. Silence of the Lambs, which some people don't consider horror. It's like a psychological thriller, but I do consider it kind of a horror film because it's scary. And it got some critical acclaim, but of course, if a movie's getting critical acclaim, it's not seen as a horror film, which I think is kind of BS, but whatever, that's just my thought. So you have that, and then you have something even like The Craft, which came out at the same time. It came out the same year as the Scream film, 1996, and it was an original story. It was about witches and stuff, and it also kind of targeted this older teen audience that went and saw it. It got it made its money back. The reviews were meh, if anything, but again, it was something where it was kind of a nice little gem that people latched onto and loved. And then also there's, of course, the fact that 2 of the people in The Craft then ended up being in this film as well, Scream. So that's always kind of fun. But yeah, so when we're looking at, the state of horror films in the 90s, this genre was not at all poppin'. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. A whole lot of like really bad sequels or, kind of these direct-to-video things, which for people who love direct-to-video, that's great, but it doesn't really make money. And it's not financially, feasible to always make these movies all the time. So that's what we're looking at in terms of what the genre of horror was looking like in the 1990s by the time this movie came out. So now that we've gone over our little history lesson, we're then going to move into a little bit about how Scream came to be and move into a plot summary after that. So now that we kind of know that at this time, 1990s, horror movies aren't exactly looking great and the state of the genre is just in a rut, then we have enter Kevin Williamson. So Kevin Williamson is a nice young man who ended up being a gay man, who is from North Carolina. He lived in Texas for a bit, and then came back to North Carolina for high school and college. He went to school for theater at East Carolina University and then promptly went to New York to try to make it as an actor. But that didn't really pan out, even though he did get a small role or like some kind of part in a soap opera. He decided in 1991 he would move to LA to try to make it as an actor out there. And also, in the meantime, try to be a screenwriter too. So when Kevin Williamson came out in 91 to LA, he had small roles on In Living Color. He was in a Roger Corman movie, and he was in like some music videos apparently. And he was also taking class at UCLA for script writing. So at this point, he's trying to make it as a screenwriter and all. He writes his first script, which was called Killing Mrs. Tingle, and then that he was able to sell to a production company called Interscope Communications, but that just kind of languished in development hell for a couple of years until after the success of this film, he was able to get this made into a movie called Teaching Mrs. Tingle, which had Helen Mirren, Katie Holmes, and Barry Watson in it, and it's not a very good film at all. It was Kevin Williamson's only directorial effort, and I think there's a reason why he could just stay being a screenwriter, maybe. But during this time, while he had sold this one script, but I don't think he got a ton of money for it, I guess, he was, trying to make ends meet by, doing some odd jobs. And one of the odd jobs he took was actually house sitting for a friend of his. So he house sits for this friend of his, and while they're out, and he's house sitting, he comes across, late at night, he comes across this TV program. I think it was called News Story, and it was profiling a serial killer from Gainesville, Florida, called the Gainesville Ripper, whose real name was actually Danny Rolling. And this news report was talking about how, he targeted young, co-eds in that area of Gainesville, and he would kill them, sneak into their house and kill them, and then he would pose their bodies in kind of macabre manners after he's killed them. He tortured them, and Kevin Williamson kind of got a little scared about this. He's scaring himself, and he called his friend on the phone to kind of make himself feel a little bit better, I guess. And then they kind of got onto the topic of well, what's your favorite scary movie and that kind of stuff. And Kevin Williamson, being a lifelong horror fan, he decided, he was like, you know what, I guess I just wrote this other play. I wrote this other screenplay, and that didn't really go anywhere. It's not really doing anything. Maybe I'll write my own horror movie. I'll do that because I'm a fan of it, and I know all the cliches, all the tropes. Let me write something that's kind of comedic but still kind of scary. So he went and took himself and wrote the film, which ended up becoming Scary Movie. This film, which was initially called Scary Movie, it was well received for being smart, self-referential. His literary agents at the time were shopping it around. And people really liked it. They loved the draft. For a first draft, it was really good. He had only, I have 3 days, but I've also heard 30 days that he wrote it in, which is still pretty good in terms of writing an actual screenplay. And so there was a bidding war. So 4 or 5 studios were bidding on this movie, the Scary Movie script. We have Paramount, Universal, Morgan Creek, Woods Entertainment, and also Oliver Stone's production company were bidding for this movie. But Kevin really, really wanted Miramax. He wanted them to actually really take it. And Miramax at the time had just opened their Dimension Films label, which was kind of more genre fare, if you will. And they had just been created, and the Weinsteins read the script. They liked it. So Dimension Films bought it, and they bought it for a cool $400,000. So, all right, that's awesome. We got this production company who wants to do it. They're interested and excited for it. So now we got to find a director. So now the first choice for director for this film was none other than the one, the only Wes Craven. But Wes Craven was offered to direct, but he declined because he just didn't want to make another slasher movie. By this point, of course he had made, iconic stuff like, Nightmare on Elm Street, and he had made, Hills Have Eyes, Last House on the Left, and he'd done good work. And he had done some other films as well. By this point, he had done Serpent in the Rainbow. He had done People Under the Stairs, Vampire in Brooklyn, couple different things, but he just really didn't want to do another slasher film. He was getting tired of the genre a little bit. That he just kind of thought were cutting up girls and were misogynistic as a whole in a way, so he kept declining it. Other contenders for the director role was, Sam Raimi. This was before he became Spider-Man director, but he had already done The Evil Dead, of course, and he turned it down. And George A. Romero even, was offered the director, but he also didn't want to do it either. And it wasn't until Wes Craven was at a convention where a young fan of his came up to him and apparently told him, like, you should really make another kick-ass movie. Some of the stuff you've been doing is just not as good as you did before, And he took this and he took that feedback and he was like, you know what? Like, I guess, these films I made before, like something somewhere, like, people seem to enjoy them and like them. Maybe I'll go back to it. So called up the Weinsteins and said, like, hey, if the job's still there, I'm in. And then at this point, when Wes Craven was brought on to direct, it was also attached that Drew Barrymore was going to star in the film as the main protagonist of the film, Sidney Prescott. So, all right, cool. We got Dimension Films going to be making this film. We got Wes Craven directing. Awesome. This seems great. And we got Drew Barrymore, who was a real hot star at the time. We got her in this movie who's going to lead the movie. So, they're getting ready to go into production, and about 5 to 6 weeks before production started, Drew Barrymore changed her mind. She decided that she really loved this opening scene, which we'll talk about in the plot summary, but she really liked this opening scene with the character of Casey, and she decided that she wanted to do that more so, and now they'd have to go find another Sydney. And when Wes found that out, he did almost quit, apparently, which, hey, I kind of get it, but, pivoted and was able to, kind of make the change of like, all right, well, now Drew Barrymore's going to be in this role, and now we got to find another person to play Sydney. But we'll go with it because Drew Barrymore is definitely worth it. She's a big star of the time, and it was even, I think, apparently Drew Barrymore even said, like, people are going to think that I'm going to live through this whole movie because I'm in it. So if I just if I do this opening scene and I'm not in the rest of the film, it'll be a shock for them, and it ends up being that for sure. So now that we have this, we're going to move into just a little bit about casting for the film as well. So now that we have Drew Barrymore out of the Sidney Prescott role, they now need to fill that role with someone else. So for the part of Sidney Prescott, other casting options that were, available, the people who screen tested for this role were Neve Campbell, Alicia Witt, Brittany Murphy. You did also have people like Reese Witherspoon, I don't think actually came in, but her name was tossed around. You also had Melissa Joan Hart in contention for it as well, and Melanie Linsky, a New Zealand actress who had starred in Heavenly Creatures with Kate Winslet. So all of these people were kind of considered, but I think it was only Alicia Witt, Brittany Murphy, Reese Witherspoon, and AJ Langer from My So-Called Life. I think those were the only folks who actually did screen tests for the role. And then, of course, it went to Neve Campbell. Neve Campbell had actually been in a movie earlier in 1996, The Craft, directed by Andrew Fleming. Shout out Andrew Fleming and for making The Craft and also making Dick in 1999. But she was a TV girl. She had been a dancer for a while, and because of injuries, transitioned to be an actress. She had been acting in Canada for a while, and she decided to come to LA to try to make it there. She was on an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark, actually. And she came to LA and booked a job with the cast of Party of Five, which was a sitcom on Fox. It was like more of a family drama, if you will, about orphaned people living their lives after their parents have died. This starred, I believe it was Neve Campbell. Lacey Chabert was the youngest daughter in that. I didn't actually watch that show, but I know about it, if anything, just because of that. But yeah, Neve Campbell, she had a really good control of her own emotions and being able to emote as an actress. And she had been in The Craft, like I said. So, this is her first real starring role in something that was like a movie. So, okay, we have Sydney. You got Billy Loomis, who's playing, that's her boyfriend. And Skeet Ulrich was kind of the only guy who was really considered of the film. Actually, the guy who plays Steve in the beginning scene was considered for that role as well. But it ended up going to Skeet Ulrich, who also starred in The Craft earlier in 1996. He plays a guy that Robin Tunney is into, and that whole movie. But you got Skeet Ulrich. You got Tatum Riley, who is Sydney's best friend. That ended up going to Rose McGowan, wonderful Rose McGowan. But other people in contention were Rebecca Gayheart from the Noxzema commercials, and she had been on a couple TV shows at that point too. It's interesting because Rebecca Gayheart and Rose McGowan would end up being in the movie Jawbreaker together in 1999, and then Rebecca Gayheart would end up in 1997 being in Scream 2 as a sorority sister. And also Melinda Clark was an option as well. She was an actress who ended up being on CSI, I believe. She played a role on that, but she was also an actress at the time. For Stu Macher, actually Matthew Lillard was cast in that role, but he was actually seeing his girlfriend at the time, who was a casting assistant to the good old Lisa Beach, casting director extraordinaire for teen movies. She cast a whole lot of different teen movies at the time, and she's cast some of these screen movies as well. But Matthew Lillard was dating a casting assistant who worked there. He was coming to see her at work, and Lisa Beach saw him and was like, "Hey, you should come in for this role. I think you'd be great for it." And so he came in and he just owned it. By that point, he hadn't really been in a whole lot. He had been in maybe a TV movie or two. I think he had been in Serial Mom by this point, John Waters' film with Kathleen Turner. It's wonderful. And he had been on Skate TV as a host on Nickelodeon. But he really hadn't kind of breaking through quite then, and this movie really kind of helped do that for him and set his career on a pretty good path. For Randy Meeks, the role of the movie obsessed horror geek, I empathize, ended up being Jamie Kennedy, but it was either between him, Breckin Meyer from Clueless and other films, and also The Craft as well, and Jason Lee from Kevin Smith's films. Yeah, it was between them, but Jamie was able to really get it, and this really kind of set his career in motion, because he then he had only been in Romeo plus Juliet by that point, and he had been a stand-up and done commercials here and there, but this was really kind of a role where he was one of the lead characters in a way. Like, he was a kind of supporting character, if anything, but he was part of that main, teen ensemble, quote unquote, if you will. So we got the kids, then we got the adults. By this point, with Gale Weathers, the role was offered to Janine Garofalo, which would have been everything, but, alas, Heather Mooney did not accept the role. Also, Brooke Shields was offered the role as well, but she didn't take it. I believe she was also in the middle of trying to have her own TV show, Suddenly Susan on NBC. So it ended up going to Courtney Cox. She came and auditioned for the role. She loved that it was against type, because by this point, she had become a sort of megastar in her own right on the TV show Friends. So people knew her as Monica Geller, I guess. And, but she didn't want to be Monica. She wanted to play against type, and it was good for that. And then the role of Dewey, they wanted to go a little older with him, but then David Arquette came in and actually auditioned. He was going to be auditioning for the kids' roles, the teenagers, but he actually wanted to read Dewey, and he really brought a certain kind of innocent attitude to the role. A kind of Barney Fife energy, if you will, because by that point he was actually similarly aged too. I think he was even a year younger than like Skeet Ulrich and Jamie Kennedy by this point. So he's actually around the teens age, as opposed to Courtney Cox, for example, who was like almost a decade older than them at that point. It's very interesting how you kind of look at the casting of this as well. Yeah, that's a little bit about that. So, you got the casting. Okay, great. Awesome. So now that you have All right, you have your production company, Dimension Films. You got your director, Wes Craven. You got this awesome cast that is going to be doing this film. Now you got to shoot the thing. So pretty much what they did was they were thinking of doing it in Canada to help save on money, but it's not American. And Wes Craven was like, nah, I don't want to do that because it's not gonna read how I want it to. So they ended up staying in California, but they went to wine country up north. The official start date of the movie was April 15th, 1996, and the end date was June 8th, 1996. So that was kind of the shoot schedule for this movie. And the third act of this film took 21 nights to shoot. And a lot of it was done in Northern California, like I said, specifically Santa Rosa, California, which is wine country. And there's a whole debacle. So Santa Rosa, they were going to be doing this movie, and they did do a lot of it in Santa Rosa, but they did it in other Northern California towns as well. But kind of point of contention for this film was actually using the Santa Rosa High School. So Santa Rosa is where Woodsboro, a lot of these Woodsboro shots were done at, and they wanted to use Santa Rosa High School, the actual high school. But then pretty much what happened was the administration of the school thought it was fine, and they were on board with it. But then the school board had final say on actually what was going to go down with this. And pretty much what happened was that once the school board found out that this was not necessarily a comedy, which they kind of thought it was supposed to be kind of like a parody spoof kind of movie, but it wasn't. It was actually kind of a legit horror movie. They declined them using the school pretty much. And they were like, no, this isn't good. Like, repeated watches of this kind of content, is not good for people. It's a whole lot of just like, I think a little bit of a BS, honestly. Horror movies don't make killers necessarily, even though there's some people who want to say that they do, but it doesn't, I don't think. That was kind of kiboshed to use the school. And then also the community as a whole was kind of not into this use of the school either. Really because, at that time, so this is 96. So recently there had just been a murder. It was a nationwide case, for a girl, Polly Klaas was her name. And she was like this 12-year-old who got, kidnapped and murdered, right in a town right near Santa Rosa. I think it was Petaluma that she was living, and she ended up being kidnapped and murdered. So things were really tense at this time, and again, it just kind of added to people's kind of hesitation for this film to actually be using like the school, for example, and things like that. So that's definitely another part, of the story of this film. But again, I think the shots and the locations, I think, are really great in this film. But there was definitely some drama in the background of this whole thing. A little bit of fun facts about, for example, like Ghostface, who's kind of this iconic character as the killer. One of the producers, I think it was Madalena, she actually found the Ghostface mask in a house when location scouting. They went to the house. It was a house that was used in Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt. So this old woman was living there. She had grown children who had moved out, and she had her son's room. And in the son's room, they found this like kind of random mask that looked like a Scream mask. It very was reminiscent of the painting The Scream in a way, but it was this white mask with like some black on it, and they were like, oh, okay, this looks kind of interesting. And they then had K&B Effects try to recreate or make something that was kind of like it, because they didn't know what to do with the mask. They just were like, okay, here's what the mask's gonna look like, here's what it says in the script, but we're trying to figure out, what does a ghost face mask look like, what does that mean? And they really liked the look of this mask that they found at this house. Also, it really had no description about what Ghostface wore. as well. They were thinking, like, do we make it black? Do we make it white? If we make it white, like, we don't want the guy to look like he's in the Klan, or the person to look like they're in the Klan. So, we got to think about that. But black just ended up being a lot scarier, which I think really worked. But the mask actually came from a company called Fun World. And after the success of this movie, they were able to kind of change the name and image of the trademark to Ghostface because of the success of the movie. But yeah, it was just like this random little mask that they had. So it kind of worked out pretty well. So then now that I've kind of gone over some, production history type stuff, this movie, only shot for about 2-ish months or so, almost 3. There was a whole lot of craziness with the third act. They even had shirts that said I survived scene 118, because that's pretty much the whole third act of the movie where it's taking place in Stu Macher's house and there's a party going on. But now that I've kind of gone over all of that, we're then going to now move into a nice little plot summary. We open on a title card that says Scream, and then you hear screaming in the background, and you see a good old landline phone that is then answered by our character, Casey Becker, played by Drew Barrymore. You hear this voice on the end of the line saying, "Hello? What number is this?" And then Casey's asking him, well, what number do you want to reach? And it just seems like it's a wrong number. So, she just says, take it easy. And then he calls back being like, hey, I just wanted to talk to you. I wanted to apologize. I just want to talk to you for a little bit. So this voice is done by Roger L. Jackson, who is also the voice of Mojo Jojo on the Powerpuff Girls. But you have him just kind of going back and forth with her. Casey, in the meanwhile, has been she's in the middle of making some popcorn because she's about to watch a video. And so this guy calls back, and he's all like, oh, well, I normally just see popcorn when I go to the movies. And she's like, well, yeah, I'm about to watch a video, and it's a scary movie. And then he's asking, well, what's your favorite scary movie? And then she's like, Halloween, the one where the babysitter stalks, the guy stalks babysitters with the mask and all that. And then talking about Nightmare on Elm Street and just these other ones. And then finally you see Casey going over to the TV, and she's talking about, the guy on the end of the line, he's like, you never really did tell me your name. And she's like, well, why do you want to know my name? And he's like, because I want to see who I'm looking at. And then she's like, wait, what? And he's like, I want to know who I'm talking to. And she's like, that's not what you said. So then, I love that in the initial pickup of this phone call, Drew Barrymore, Casey, she says something about him talking, and she's like, they had 900 numbers for that, goodbye. And 900 numbers, if you don't know, are for, they were for party lines back in the 90s, for phone sex lines too as well. They would have 900 numbers for. And then, of course, talking about what's your favorite scary movie. I'm about to watch a video, but talking about scary movie, this goes back to the fact that this movie was called Scary Movie for a time while it was being shot. But then you go into this creepy guy on the phone with Casey wanting to play a game. So she's locking all the doors, bitch. She's just like, ooh, girl, I don't know what to do. This is scary, and she's just scared out of her wits. The caller seems to be kind of messing with her. He rings the doorbell, and he's just really menacing, and she's just crazy. Casey's just crying and being like, well, what do you want? And he says to see what your insides look like, which is so freaky. This whole scene is so scary. This is when Casey's like, you better believe, because my boyfriend will be here any minute, and he's big and he plays football, he'll kick the shit out of you, so you better just be gone. And then the guy on the phone's like, ooh, yeah, I'm shaking in my boots, and his name wouldn't be Steve, would it? And Casey's like, oh, girl, how did you know his name? And then she had already turned the patio lights on before to kind of take a look at what's outside, and then she turns them on again. And then Steve is in a chair, tied up, bitch, with this duct tape over his mouth. This guy is played by Kevin Patrick Walls, who apparently was actually close to getting the role of Billy. He actually auditioned for it, but ooh, yeah. So she sees her boyfriend out there, and she's just like, oh, my man's out there. Oh no, what are you gonna do to him? This is horrible. So then, the guy on the phone's like, well, I want to play a game. play a trivia game. We'll start easy. It's movie trivia. Yeah, it was like something, name the killer from Halloween. Be like, oh, it's one of your favorites. Come on, remember. And she's like, Michael. And then, he's like, correct, good. And then he's all like, now it's time for the real question. She's just like, no, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? And Drew Barrymore, baby, she is just doing so good in this role. It's so good. But anyway, you got the actual question that this guy asks, which is name the killer in Friday the 13th. And, Casey's just like, Jason, I know that. I saw that movie 20 goddamn times. And then, the guy also then says, like, well, then you should have known that Jason's mother, Mrs. Voorhees, Pamela Voorhees, she was the actual killer in the first Friday the 13th. He didn't show up. Jason didn't show up till the sequel. And he got her. Well, Steve dies. He gets disemboweled. And it's just, like, really gross and disgusting. And then, hey, I'm not done. And then, I have another question for you. And, if you answer right, I might let you live. And he's asking, what door am I at? And it's just, like, really freaky and scary. So then you have, the whole chase scene. So, Casey is, like, running for her life. She, like, went and got, like, a knife from the kitchen. And she's just like, bitch, I'm trying to live in here. I'm trying to live my life. And then she sees, like, this guy, like, running through her living room and all this stuff, and she sneaks out the back door. And so she sneaks out this back door, and she, like, goes and she sees her babe, like, in this pool chair or whatever, and she's just like, oh god, I gotta get out of here. And then she then sneaks, and she sneaks up to a window, and the killer's right there, and he tries to, like, get her or whatever, and she's, like, running and all this. The killer then, like, jumps out this window where he, like, tackles her, and then she's, like, putting up a fight. She, like, kicks him in the balls, or what's to be his balls, I guess. And so then she's just, like, trying to run, but he catches up with her, and he, like, stabs her in the shoulder, which is, like, so horrible. And then you're just like, oh no, girl, you're not gonna live. And then she's really putting up a fight, though, because she's trying, and she sees, like, her, this car coming down, and it's, like, coming in, and it's her parents, and she sees her parents on the porch, and they're talking to each other, but they don't notice her. It's a whole thing, y'all. And then they go up in the house. Her parents go up in the house. Her mom and dad are played by a guy named David Booth and a woman named Carla Hatley. But anyway, so, like, they're up in there, but they know something's wrong because, like, the popcorn is, like, burnt to hell, and, like, there's all this smoke in the house, and then obviously, like, a chair got thrown through their patio doors. And then, Casey, that baby, she just, pulls the mask off of the guy. She doesn't know who it is, but I guess she kind of recognizes him, I guess. And he just, like, kills her. And all the while, because the parents know something went wrong, and the dad's like, call the police. He's like, go down in the Mackenzies, call the police, all this. And then the mom's trying to call the police, but then she hears her daughter on the other end because she had that phone with her the whole time. And I was like, oh, this is horrible. But anyway, so yeah, the Friday the 13th thing. And then, the dad's like, all right, go down to the Mackenzies, like, all that. And then the mom is about to go down the Mackenzies. She opens the door, and she sees, like, at this tree that her daughter is just, like, hanging there all dead and disemboweled. And it's so, so sad. I think this is interesting because they have Drew Barrymore in this movie, who comes from a famous family. She was a child actor. She'd been through some things, party girl, going to rehab, all that stuff. But it's interesting that they have this character who's from a famous family. She's a famous actress. But then also it's like, you could say that that's sort of a nod to Halloween because Jamie Lee Curtis was the daughter, is the daughter or was the daughter of Janet Leigh, who was in Psycho. So there's all these kind of nods going on. So there's that. And the Mackenzies, of course, if you've seen the original Halloween, that's the name of the neighbors down the street that, Laurie Strode is all like, I want you to go to the Mackenzies. I want you to tell them to call the police. But yeah, no, our baby Casey, she's dead. Dead. And so then we cut to another scene where we see our girl, Sydney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell. And she's typing on her computer on DOS. And, she hears a little something, but she doesn't really think anything of it. And then she goes up to her window because she hears another noise. And then boom, bitch! Like her boyfriend Billy, played by Skeet Ulrich, he like jumps in through her window and she screams and she's just like, oh no. And so like, what are you doing here? Do you know what my dad will do to you? Anyway, so her dad is all like, hey, I thought I heard screaming. Like, what the heck's going on in here? Yeah, she's all like, can you knock? Like, and she has it set up where like her door and her closet door like hit each other. So like that's the way that she has a lock, I guess, or can get some privacy a little bit. But anyway, so yeah, they have that whole thing. And Sid's dad is talking to her and talking about how he's going to an expo, and he's leaving in the morning. So like, I'll be back on Sunday or whatever. What I want to know is that when you see this house and you see this how expansive and nice this house is, I'm like, listen, like, what does this guy do for a living? Like, Jesus Lord, because it's a nice house. But anyway, so then you have the next scene where, Skeet Ulrich is there, Billy's there, and he's talking to Sydney, and he's all like, I was watching The Exorcist, and it was edited for TV. All the good stuff was cut out. 2 years ago, we used to be hot and heavy, but now we're just edited for content. Yeah, you see all this kind of going on, and I will say Billy's hair looks so gross in this whole movie. I don't know what was going on with it, but like, I don't know. It just, that hair person needed to get a talking to, because maybe it was part of it or whatever, but he just looked, he didn't look good. This whole thing where, Billy then leaves, but then before he leaves, Sydney flashes him, gives him a little peek. So then you have this tracking shot where you see the high school, Woodsboro High School. This is in Woodsboro, California. And so you see this like dramatic music sting, Marco Beltrami with his score. And he's all like, so there's a tracking shot where we see there's like reporters and this whole bunch of shit's going on. And we see Sydney looking like a legend. And so then she's walking up to school. She's just like, what the heck? And in the background, one of the people in the one of the reporters is actually Linda Blair, which is funny because they were just talking about The Exorcist. So it's funny that Linda Blair literally plays one of the reporters. And then we get introduced to our girl, Tatum Riley, played by the one and only Rose McGowan. Love her. And she is wearing this like yellow shirt and like this little what is it, like a little skirt or whatever. She's blonde. The reason that she's blonde is because apparently they can't have two brunettes, because normally Rose McGowan had black hair pretty much all the time, and she was more of dark hair. And then pretty much like she had to dye her hair blonde. She went to Kathy Conrad's stylist, apparently, her colorist, who was one of the producers of the movie. But anyway, so that all happens. It's cute. And so they're walking to school, and, Tatum's kind of filling her in, being like, yeah, Casey Becker and Steve Orth were, killed last night. And then Sydney's all like, oh, she like sat next to me in English. Be like, well, now she's not. And so, they're talking, be like, nobody knows what's going on, like, and nobody knows. And they're saying it's the worst crime they've had in a while. It's even worse than... Well, it's bad. So that's setting up to like there's something else bad that happened. So then we go to the school scene. We go into a classroom where Sydney is sitting, where she's looking at Casey's now empty desk. She's just like, oh my God, what the hell? So then she goes and she's told to go to the principal's office, where they're now all questioning everybody in the school pretty much. And they're all like, how did you know this person? What did you know? And so this is our introduction to Principal Himbry, played by an uncredited role of Henry Winkler, also known as the Fonz from Happy Days. We also get introduced to Sheriff Burke, played by Joseph Whipp, who had actually been he played a cop in Nightmare on Elm Street, but he's like the sheriff of this town. And then we also get introduced to Deputy Dwight Dewey Riley, played by David Arquette. And you can see that the police kind of already know Sydney a little bit. You can see that Sydney calls Dewey when it's Deputy Riley today, Sid, because we will then find out that is actually Tatum's older brother. So yeah, we have this, and then we get into this scene where it's this it's this fountain shot where you have all the kids there. So you got Skeet Ulrich, you got Billy there, you got Neve Campbell, you got Sydney there, you got Stu Macher, who's a friend of theirs, played by Matthew Lillard. You have Rose McGowan, you got Tatum Riley there, and then you got Randy Meeks, played by Jamie Kennedy there, and they're all just kind of sitting around chatting. Somebody talks about, like, I think Stu says something about, like, it takes a man to be able to do something like that to somebody, and then, Tatum's all like, hello, have you seen Basic Instinct? To make you be just, you have to have the mind of a man or whatever. And so, you have that whole scene, and you have, like, them just kind of shooting the shit and talking. And, Jamie Kennedy does, like, this bad impression of, like, Jerry Lewis or something, where he's like, did you hear, I heard that they found her living in the mailbox with her spleen and her pancreas or whatever. And so that was just kind of rude and gross. But anyway, so Sydney's just, like, going through it, and she's just feeling a certain way. She's like, how do you gut somebody? Stu is, like, talking about it a little bit, and then Billy's just like, it's called tact, you fuck rag, kind of a thing like that. But anyway, so then you have that scene where they're talking at the fountain and all that. You're getting a little bit of, like, how these kids talk to each other. I think then you have a scene where after that, Sydney is, like, on the bus or something. Well, she's not. She's getting off the bus to go to her house, and so she checks the. It's funny. She checks the mailbox, which in the commentary track, I think Wes Craven said something about, like, it was kind of funny that she checked the mailbox, especially since, like, the scene before was talking about how they found her liver in the mailbox or whatever. You have that, so Sydney just walks up to her palatial goddamn house that she has in, like, wine country, which is amazing. Still, what does he do for a living? Like, Jesus Lord. Anyway, so she has the nicest goddamn house ever, and so she is just, like, she's talking to Tatum over the phone. She's, like, outside walking up her palatial mansion, and so Sydney's talking about, like, just with, like, all the reporters and the cameras and all that. It's just, it just feels a lot, more. It feels too familiar. You know what I mean? And so we're kind of like, what the heck, girl? Like, what's going on? But then we see a scene where Sydney's getting ready. She's getting her sleepover stuff together because they were talking about, like, oh, hey, since your dad's out of town, like, you can come stay over my house. She's talking to Tatum and all. And so you see her with her clothes that she's going to wear the next day. And she goes to the closet. She looks for something, but she's not really looking in there a whole lot. And she's just like, okay, cool. So then I'm going to go over, and she sits on the couch in her, like, little living room or whatever. It's like a weird living room kitchen kind of duo thing. And she turns on the TV, and actually one of the reporters, because she just keeps seeing news reports, one of the reporters on the TV is actually casting director Lisa Beach. She made a little cameo in there. But she then gets this intro, which we already got a little bit of an intro to this character, but we then actually see our girl Gail Weathers, played by Courtney Cox at that time. She is a reporter. She is talking about, how this whole thing happened with Casey and Steve. But, a year before, Maureen Prescott, mother and wife, was, brutally murdered in this place or whatever as well. And then so that's when you realize, oh shit, like, Maureen Prescott was killed a year before. We then see that Sydney gets up. She hears a noise, but she doesn't think much about it. And she then goes over to, like, this other couch that they have. And you see that there's a picture of her and her mom. You see that Maureen Prescott was her mother. So we now get the idea that, like, Sydney is pretty much dealing with the death of her mom, which is, like, really sad, and especially since she was murdered. And she falls asleep. She falls asleep for, like, 30 minutes, and now it's dark. And so then, when it's all dark, she hears the phone ring, and she's all like, hello? And it's Tatum. She's like, practice ran late. I'm coming over right now. I thought we could swing by the video store and, like, pick up a movie to watch. I was thinking Tom Cruise and All the Right Moves. If you pause it just right, you can see his penis. Then he gets off the phone with Tatum, and then it rings again. And then you hear the same creepy voice that you heard with Casey, and he's just, talking to her about, he's talking to Sydney about, like, what with all the murders and all and how spooky it is. It's right out of a horror movie. And then she's thinking, like, oh, okay, Randy, yeah, I get it. Are you at work right now? Because Tatum's on her way over. And, her and the creepy voice are just talking more and more. And, she still thinks it's Randy putting on a voice, but then the voice is all like, I'm not Randy. And so then she's like, oh, okay. And so, Sydney's talking to him, and I think he makes some kind of allusion for the fact that like he's watching her, and she's like, okay, yeah, well, I'll call your bluff. Where are you right now? Your front porch. All right, I'll call your bluff. So she comes out of her house on her like palatial ass veranda, and she is like, can you see me right now? And he's like, yeah. And she's all like, okay. And she just like starts kind of picking her nose. She's like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And she's just like not taking it seriously at all. And then she's like, nice try, Randy. Like, see ya, goodbye. And then the guy just is all like, you hang up on me, and I'll gut you like your mother or whatever. Do you want to die, Sydney? Your mother sure didn't. And then she's all like, fuck you, you cretin. She comes back in her house, and then the fucking and then Ghostface comes out of the closet and is all like, trying to like kill Sydney pretty much, but she's like putting up a fight or whatever. And at that point, before this, she has this conversation about like, oh, come on, I don't watch that shit. And be like, oh, are you scared? It's like, well, no, like, they're all the same. Like, some big breasted actress is, running, is going up the stairs when she should be running out the front door. It's insulting, And so then, she then runs up the stairs because she doesn't open the front door. So she's like, but she's putting up a fight. And so she's trying to like get up on here. So she runs into her room. She does the same trick from before where she puts her closet in her little door. So like, the guy can't get right in. But I don't think they were actually going to kill Sydney. They just kind of want to like ruffle her feathers a little bit. So then, she's all like on her computer and she's like dialing in 911, and then 911's like, what's your emergency? Where the hell is this technology? Because even in 2022, I still don't see it, but whatever. You have all this, maybe it was for the hearing impaired or whatever, but I was like, girl, I ain't never seen this in my life. So then, the killer's gone away, like he's not there anymore, and so then you see Billy boo in the fucking window again, and she's all like, why does he do that? But like, anyway, whatever. So he just like comes up, and how does he even do it? Anyway, that's what I want to know, but like, whatever, regardless. But, so he comes through the window, and he's all like, it's okay now, I'm here, and then his cell phone drops out of his like pants or something, and she's all like, what the hell do you have a cell phone for? And so then because she had used this 911 technology, I guess, she then like runs, and she's just like, oh no, like this guy's trying to kill me. And so then she runs to her front door, and then Dewey is standing there with the ghost face mask, and he's just like, they both scream, and it's kind of a funny scene a little bit. But then Billy gets taken by the police, and they have to take him in for questioning, and they gotta like, deal with that. Sydney's alone. She's frightened. She's scared. And so, the ambulance came too because, she just like fought off this killer who she doesn't even fucking know who it is. And so, then you have, so you got Dewey there, you got, I think the Sheriff Burke's there, and like some other police officers are there too. They take Billy away, and so then, Dewey and like, I think Sheriff Burke and all them are just like with Sydney at the ambulance. And then Tatum pulls up in her little red bug is so cute. I love her car. As she's all like, hey, Sydney, like, this is where we actually find out that that's her, that Dewey is Tatum's brother. This is where we literally find out. Although you could have also assumed that like when we first meet Tatum, because she says something about Dewey said this. So again, we didn't know Dewey until like a few seconds after that, but still, it's all there. Anyway, so then Gail Weathers arrives on the scene with her her cameraman Kenny, who's played by he is played by W. Earl Brown, who had been in Vampire in Brooklyn. I'm sorry, Vampire in Brooklyn, another Wes Craven film, and he had also been in New Nightmare as well. He was the morgue attendant. But Gail arrives on the scene. She's trying to get what's going on, and you could just tell like, okay, like, there's something going on here. Nobody wants to talk to Gail, and you have like the line of like Tatum kind of gives her some snark, and she like goes away. You're a real pain in my ass. Leave Sid alone. And then Kenny comes up to Gail, and he's like, oh, what are we doing? What's going on? And then good old Gail's just like, Kenny, I know you're about 50 pounds overweight, but when I say move, take that as move your fat tub of lard ass now. And so you can just kind of see what woman we're dealing with when we're talking about Gail. She doesn't give a shit about anybody except herself and her career. So that's what we kind of get. But we don't quite know, well, all we know is that Gail's trying to get the story, but we don't know much more than just that. But then we're going to find out some other stuff soon. So then, for her own safety, Sydney is brought to the police station. They're trying to look up to see, what's going on. So they try to look up Sid's dad, but apparently, they tried seeing where he was registered, but apparently Sid's dad is not registered at the Hilton near the airport or whatever. Which I don't know how I guess they looked that up or they found that information. So I don't really know why he wasn't registered there, but again, it's to move the plot along. We don't really get an answer, but, that's what it is. We then also find out, I guess, that Gail works for a San Francisco, affiliate network, I guess. Because I think, on her news truck or whatever, it says something about San Francisco. So, we're to assume that I guess this is, probably near San Francisco, I guess. If we're assuming this all takes place in Northern California, that's up in Northern California. So I guess that makes sense. So yeah, there's some craziness going on because, Sydney is there's just all this stuff going on. People are finding out that this has happened. But then they're like, okay, I gotta get out of here. So then you see Tatum's there, you see Sydney's at the police station. And they're looking to see, if they can find, Sydney's dad, where he at. But then, they're like, okay, well, we got to get out of here, so let's leave. So Dewey actually gets, he's helping for Sid and Tatum to get out of there, to kind of take Sid back to their house. So Dewey, gets the car, he, goes and gets the, a police car or whatever. He's going and getting that, and they take the back way out of the police station because there's, a bunch of camera news people because they're all trying to cover all this shit going on. And so then Gail Weathers is there. She's trying to, get in there. She's like, hi, Gail Weathers reporting for this, blah, blah. And so, she's not allowed in, but she's just like, all right, well, I'll do you one better, and I'll go around and I'll go and see if I can get this scoop or whatever. So then you see Sydney and Tatum and Dewey, they're going out the back way and they're all trying to leave. And so Dewey's getting the car and then Sid and Tatum are there and then Gail Weathers just comes barged in. And so then, Gail's just like, what happened tonight? Da da da. And then, Tatum's just like, girl, go away. Leave us alone. But then, Sydney's just like, no, Gail, no, Tatum, she's just doing her job. Isn't that right, Gail? And so this is when you're finding out that, there's a little bit more about what's going on between Sydney and Gail, because apparently there is some, history there. How's the book? And it's this book is, it's great. Be like, oh, I'll look for it. And be like, I'll send you a copy. And then Sydney just punches her in the face, which is marvelous. But I don't think we only get a little bit of the specifics of we'll get the specifics in a minute, but all we know is that, okay, there's some animosity between these two women. So that's all we know. And just boom, she went down. So then Tatum and Sid are at Tatum's house, the Dewey, the Riley residence, and Tatum is there. She's with her little bunny that she has. She's in her little pigtails or whatever, and she's just I'll send you a copy. Bam. I'll send you a copy. Bam, Sid, super bitch. And she's being a real cool hype man, which is great. Anyway, so then, Tatum's in there. Tatum's mom comes in and she's all hey girl, or I think Dewey might come in actually. Dewey comes in and then he gives some frozen vegetables, so that, Sid can nurse her knuckles. And so I always kind of wonder why does Tatum have two beds in her room? She has two twin size beds, but whatever. It's none of my business. But anyway, so you see this, and then you see Tatum's mom come in. She says, hey, phone's for you, Sid. And she's like, oh, is it my dad? Oh, I didn't get that. So then she goes out and she answers the phone, and then it's the killer. It's this guy, and be like, oh no. And then he's talking about you fingered the wrong guy again. And then you're like, ooh, what is going on? What is this story going on? So then, they're all freaking out. They're just ooh, girl, what is going on? So then, the phone call and all that ends. And then Dewey is there and he's just hello. And it's just like a really kind of silly scene. But yeah, no. So then you go from there. So then we're alluding that like she fingered the wrong guy again, which is first off a really interesting way of saying it, kind of sort of. But like also we're about to learn what that actually means in this next scene. So then you have Sid and Tatum going to school. They get dropped off by Dewey. They're like, "This is school, Sid. Like you'll be safe here." You see Tatum and Sid walking into school, but before that, she sees Gale Weathers in her little news van. She's like, I gotta walk over here and do this. And so, like, Sid goes over by herself. Gale, she's all like, don't come any closer. And, she's like, I just want to talk to you. I think we need to talk. And, like, off the record, like, don't bring your cameraman in here with you. I will also say Tatum's outfits are so good in this. They are not realistic whatsoever, but I don't care. They look great. But anyway, so you get this whole kind of backstory where you learn about, like, hey, like, you wrote this book about the Woodsboro murder of my mother, pretty much, and you're saying that I was a liar, pretty much. You're saying that I had the wrong guy, because by this point, before this, actually, yeah, before they get to school, you see them having breakfast, and you see that they're watching a news report about, what's been going on, but then you see that, Cotton Weary is this guy, so that's who they were alluding to if you fingered the wrong guy, was that Cotton Weary is accused of killing Maureen Prescott. And so that's when you learn all of that. But anyway, so they're at school, she goes up to Gale, and she's all like, hey, we need to talk, like, you called me a liar. Be like, yeah, I think you identified the wrong man, you saw somebody leave with his jacket, but you didn't see necessarily Cotton leave with it, because Gale has talked to Cotton. His story's still the same. He confesses to having an affair with Maureen and all that. You're saying that it was Cotton who killed your mom, but I am saying that it's not. And so there's like this intricate backstory going on, which I thought was really interesting. And yeah, it's just kind of showing that. It's showing that animosity and just like that conflict between Sid and Gale, which I thought was just really good. And then, Tatum comes up to the situation. She's just like, nice welt, honey. Nice welt, sweetie. And so then they go to school, finally. And then then Gale Weathers is all like, oh, hey, like, a man's on death row. Like, do you know, if this works out, like, I could save a man's life. She's talking to Kenny about it. And she's just like, do you know what that'll do for my book sales? And so then you see inside the school, so you see Sydney, Tatum, and Stu. They're at the lockers. And so then, Sydney's talking about, like, have you seen Billy? Like, I haven't seen him in a minute. I haven't talked to him since he got booked or whatever. And then I think Stu says something about, like, since you branded him the Candyman, no, he's been fine. So that's another horror movie kind of reference. And then you see some dick just, like, running down the hall in a ghostface and mask and all that. And so then, Sydney's just not into it. She just, like, walks away, and she's just, like, all that. But she runs into Billy at school. And so then they have this conversation about just like, hey, remember I was at the police last night. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't have done anything. Like, the guy called you again, but like, I wasn't there. Like, how could you think I'm a killer? And honestly, during this whole conversation, so they're pretty much talking about, like, I think you need to start getting over, your mom's death, Sid. It's been almost a year since this has happened, and you haven't gotten over it. I understand, like, when my mom left my dad, like, she left out of my life, but, like, I accepted it and moved on. And then, freaking Sid's like, is your brain leaking? Like, my mom is dead. Like, this is not the same thing. What the hell? And so, like, your mom's not lying in a coffin somewhere. It's not the same thing at all. And then she's talking about, like, I'm sorry that, I'm a blip on your perfect existence. She just walks away. She walks into the bathroom. And then Billy's all like, nobody even said anything about that. But here's the thing, though. I do think, like, Billy is being kind of a dick here, I think, at least. Because I'm just like, listen, like, I understand, like, everyone grieves differently. So, like, the thing is that you're telling her to, like, get over her mom's death. And it's like, I mean, people grieve in all different ways. And yeah, at some point, she obviously has dealt with the fact that her mom was literally viciously murdered. But, like, come on now. Like, don't be a dick, dude. And then also trying to compare your own kind of thing when your mom was, like, divorced your dad or whatever. It's like, yeah, that's not exactly the best thing. But he did say, like, it's a bad analogy, whatever. So I say Billy's a dick and dump him, but she doesn't dump him. And then also, what kind of perfect existence? Because he does say, like, nobody even said that, but like, what kind of perfect existence does he have? He just said he came from like a divorced home. You know what I mean? So it's like, obviously his stuff's not perfect. So then you see this, Sydney went into the bathroom, she's looking all cute and stuff. And so then she hears these two girls talking about, in the bathroom. And so she's like, ooh, bitch, I gotta hide in the stall. So she hides in the stall. And then these girls are just talking shit about her, pretty much. They're just like, I don't think she was attacked at all. Da 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 da. And so one of them, the cheerleader girl, she's talking about like, maybe she's a slut, like her mother. She's like, maybe this is what happened. Like, she's all suicidal. Where's God? And then she decides that, teen suicide is out this year and homicide is a much more therapeutic expression. And then her friend is all like, where do you get this shit? She says, Ricky Lake, which is kind of a dated, reference, but I think I love that though. And then her friend is just like, you are pathetic. Which this little scene is so silly and funny in a very dark way. But yeah, so then, Sydney's all like, girl, they're talking shit about me. So then, she comes out the stall, she looks herself in the mirror, she's like, pathetic. So then she's all like, looking under, and she's just like, she's hearing a noise or two. She's just like, is someone there? And so then, you have this whole scene, and then somebody, boo bitch, like, is trying to, like, kill you pretty much. And so then she's just, like, running out there, and she runs out of there. And she actually runs, like, down the stairs and probably out of the school, honestly, I would. Then you have the scene where Dewey and Gail meet. So Gail's walking up, and she's just like, do you have any information? Blah, blah, blah. And she meets Dewey, and she's all like, hey, Dewey, yeah, she's just like meeting him for the first time. And so you seem awfully young to be a police officer, and be like, I'm 25 years old. Oh, well, my demographic, I do well between the ages of males ages 18 to 24. So they have their whole little moment of meeting. That might happen before the bathroom chase scene, but I think bathroom chase scene actually happens first. So then Dewey and Gail meet, and then they have their little first meeting, which is kind of cute. Then you see Principal Himbry. He's like there, and he's also there because I think it was earlier, or it might be around the scene, that he has these two guys who were like scaring the shit out of people with the ghostface stuff, and he's all like, you pathetic whatever. He has this whole like monologue. He has these scissors, he's just like using them, and he's just like looking threatening as hell, actually. And so then you're like, oh, okay, so he like wants to expel these guys or whatever. He'd be like, get out of here, da-da-da. So then you have that whole scene. Then you have the scene, I think it was after they meet, or Dewey and Gail meet, and you have this scene where like Principal Himbry has like the he has the Ghostface mask on, and he's like, meh. And then, nobody's really in the office a whole lot, but he's like hearing some noises, and then he's like, what the hell? What is going on here? So then, he goes out into the hall, and he's just like, what the hell? What's going on? And then, he goes out there, you see this janitor, and that's Wes Craven in like the Freddy getup, and he's like, what'd you call me? He's like, not you, Fred. So then, Principal Himbry goes back, and he's like going through his little administration office, and then he goes back into his actual office where he closes the door, and bitch, Ghostface is behind there, and he kills him. And then there's like this really cool shot of like Ghostface's mask in his eye after he's getting killed or whatever. So yeah, so Principal's dead. So then you see, so before all this, I think it was during Gail and Dewey meeting, and before his murder, unfortunately, Principal Himbry was like, due to the events of what's going on right now, all classes are canceled until further notice. So then all the people are leaving school and everything. So you have this whole kind of like people are leaving. So you see Sydney and Tatum walking. They're talking about like, oh, that whole thing in the bathroom is probably just some guy being a dick and all that. And so Stu comes up, and he's all like, it is Kizul, because Skuzul is out or whatever. And so they're just walking and be like, let's have a little siesta tonight, to kind of pay respects to like celebrate, having this time off or whatever. And so, he picks up Tatum and all this, and it's just like really silly. And so, they're like, all right, whatever, we'll do it. It might be a good time. Let's do it. Okay, you get the groceries, and then, freaking, what's his name? Stu is just like, oh, yeah. And so then you have a scene where Sydney and Tatum, and I think even before this a little bit, there might have been this whole, what was it? It was like this whole sort of scene of people just like getting ready to like kind of close down. There's this curfew going on around Woodsboro. But there is a scene. It's after Principal Hembry's been murdered and all that stuff. He's already been murdered. Where Sydney and Tatum are on Tatum's porch. And Tatum's porch, and so they're on there and they're talking, and she's like, because they're talking about like, you know, well, if I didn't, because I think it's probably spurred from the earlier conversation with Gail of like, you know, if I didn't identify the right guy, like, you know, like if he did have an affair with my mom, like how come he couldn't prove it in court? And then Tatum's all like, well, you can't really prove a rumor. That's why it's a rumor. She's talking about like, you know, it goes further back than that, Sid. You know, there's talk of other men. Maybe your mom was just a really unhappy woman. And Sid's like, and that's what you believe, right? And Tatum's like, well, you know, you can only hear that Richard Gere gerbil story so many times before you have to start believing it. Sydney has this really like little thing where he's like, then the killer's still out there. Like, you know, if I got the wrong guy, like the killer's still out there. And then, you know, Tatum's all like, ugh, like, come on now, like, you know, you're sounding like a Wes Carpenter flick or whatever, which is Wes Craven and John Carpenter put together, which I think was really funny. So then you have Jamie Kennedy got Randy Meeks working at the video store. He's talking to Matt Lillard. He's talking to Stu about, you know, all this kind of stuff, you know, and if they watch prom night, they'd save time. And then some girl comes up and is all like, where's that werewolf movie with E.T.'s mom? And then and Jamie Kennedy's Randy's all like, it's The Howling, horror straight ahead. And so then you see Billy and Randy talking, and you know, if Sid leaves Billy, you know, do you think you should go out with me? And then like, you know, Stu's all like, no, I don't. And so then Stu and Billy kind of intimidate Randy what's going on and be like, you know what, I think you're the killer. And, you know, all of this. So you have that whole kind of exchange at the video store and, you know, Randy just being his like eccentric ass self. So you see that scene, and then you have the scene where Sid and Tatum go shopping for the party later that night. So they're getting like, you know, a bunch of like chips, Doritos, Tostitos, all that stuff. And then you see that Ghostface is like somehow in the market, but he's like undiscovered by anybody, which was really weird. So then you see that I think this is actually the scene where you see people starting to get, you know, wind down, and they're, you know, getting ready, and the curfew and the closing up and everything, which has Red Right Hand by Nick Cave. It was you know, behind that, which was really good. And they have they pull up to the sheriff's station, I think it was. I think what it was is that it was actually before Tatum and Sid go shopping, they are dropped off around this area and they go off on their separate ways because Dewey's going to go into the sheriff's station. So they have like a little comment about like, wow, this place is like the Town that Dreaded Sundown, which is another horror movie kind of like reference. And then you have a comment of like, just imagine, Sid, like if this gets turned into a movie, you could have some A-list actor playing you. Be like, you know, if I have any luck, I have Tori Spelling playing me. And then you see a scene between Dewey and Sheriff Burke where like Sheriff Burke is smoking a cigarette and like Dewey is like eating ice cream, and they're talking about how like all those calls that came in to like Sid and Casey, like they're from Neil Prescott's phone. And so, you know, there's a whole thing with that. You know, we're trying to cross-reference and we're trying to like, you know, see what's going on, but like it's looking kind of weird. Like maybe it was like something, you know, that Maureen's Prescott's murders just, you know, happened a year ago. Like maybe something's going on, you know. You have that whole scene. I like the kind of comparison of just like, you know, Dewey's eating ice cream while his like boss is on a smoke break, which I thought was kind of funny. So there's that. And then you see, this is when we get into the famous pretty much scene 118, which is like the whole third act of the movie. So you see Dewey driving Sid and Tatum to the party. So it's like at night they're driving, and Gail, I think, is following behind them. And so you see them, and then they get dropped off, you know, so they go into the party. So Sid and Tatum go into the party. So Sid's behind Tatum, and then Tatum's all like, hey, what's up? Party's here. And so then, you know, you see, I think Dewey is like kind of sitting out in the squad car a little bit because he's still, I think, tasked with like watching and seeing what's going on at the party because, you know, people know about it. But then Gail comes up and, her and Dewey talk again. And so, oh, hey, like, I guess I'll go into the party. So they go into the party. Dewey and Gail go in the party. And, people are like, holy shit, you'll never believe it's the chick from Top Story and all that. And, Dewey's just like, hey, I'm here too. And so then, like, Tatum's all like, Dewey, like, what the hell are you doing here? And also, what are you, like, what is she doing here? Like, Sid's here. Like, so then Gail, is like meeting all the young people and all this. And they're just like, oh my God, I love your show, all this. And so then Gail is pretty much sneaking a camera in there. And she's just like, well, it's been great. Gotta go, fellow kids. So then she leaves. And then Dewey leaves after her. Then you find out that, you go back to the news van. So that's when Gail goes back to the news van. And she's all like, all right, cool. We got picture, we got sound, but we're on a 30-second delay. So, we're not getting everything in real time, but we're at least on a delay. And then there's like a Jamie Lee Curtis comment where, they're talking about like, she won this for Terror Train. And then, Sydney's talking about something where she's like, The Fog, Prom Night, Terror Train. Why is Jamie Lee Curtis in all of these movies? So that's kind of fun. And then I think there was another scene as well. It was a little earlier or something. It was part of it where like Stu's all like to Tatum. He's like, give me another beer. And then like Tatum's like, what am I, the beer wench? And so then Tatum actually walks away and she goes into the garage. So we're going to get to the garage. So, this whole thing's kind of happening. The party's continuing to happen. And so Tatum goes into the garage. She goes into the refrigerator and she gets some beers. And it's a kind of a creepy little, scene because it's a little dark in there. She scares herself with like this cat that's in there. And like, but she has to be the freaking beer wench and like get the beer for her boyfriend and all. And then you notice, like, in his little, like, refrigerator, he has, like, so many eggs. I'm like, how many damn eggs do you need? But anyway, so there's that. Then you see that Tatum happens across, or what had happened was she locked herself in to the garage. She was like, fuck, like, what the hell? So nobody's hearing her, so they can't come and get her. So she's like, all right, fuck this then. So like she goes and tries to open the garage and make a little spot for herself where she can like get through. But as she has done that and she's walking to go underneath the garage door closes, and that's when you see Ghostface, bitch. So then you see Ghostface, and then she's all like, Tatum's all like, oh, what is this? I spit on your garage, which is a I spit on your grave reference. And so, you have this whole thing, and Tatum's talking to the killer, and, she's all like, oh, you want to play Psycho Killer? Can I be the helpless victim? Please, Mr. Ghostface, I want to be here for the sequel. And then, like, it gets kind of real, though, because then it's like, he's, like, literally slashes her arm, and she's like, what the hell, fuck? And so then, she's, like, putting up a fight, though. She's, like, hitting him. She throws, like, a beer bottle or two at him, and she's really putting up a fight. Tatum put up a fight, I'll say that. My queen. And so then she's, like, trying to get out of there. She can't get out through the door, but she is, she can't seem to get, the garage up because she's in there with the killer. So she's going to go through this doggy door, this little dog flap, right? The pet flap. And so then, she gets kind of stuck in there, and then, the killer then, like, makes it so that, like, the garage door goes up, and then Tatum's crushed in the garage door. So then Tatum gets her ass killed, which is, like, really sad. Rest in peace, Tatum. Rip. But anyway, so then you have, let's see. You have Billy and Sydney there talking because Billy showed up to the party. And so, because I think it was Stu and Jamie Kennedy, Brandy, they were like standing by the door, and it's while people were still kind of leaving a little bit. And so then, the Billy shows up, and, Sydney's all like, oh, we need to talk anyway. So they go upstairs to the parents' bedroom, I guess, to go and talk and all that. And so then, so you have that scene, so you have all those people, and then you have Stu and Randy, as, like, Billy and Sid go away, and they go up to the parents' room. There's, like, a whole thing where, like, they have this little exchange of, like, I think you're clueless, be like, really, Alicia? So that was, like, kind of a fun little thing, too, because that movie had just come out a year before, so it was kind of funny that they commented on it as well. So then Billy and Sid go into Stu's parents' room, and they're talking about, like, no, I'm sorry. Like, Billy's all trying to say, like, I understand, like, people grieve different ways, da 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 da. And then Sid's like, no, I'm sorry. Like, I need to stop letting my mom's death, like, just like impede me from these things and all this. Be like, why can't my life just? And then they'd start talking about, like, Sid's all like, in some way, I feel like, what if I turn out like her, like the bad seed? And then Billy makes something about like Silence of the Lambs. He makes some Silence of the Lambs comment where it's like Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs, where she keeps seeing dead flashbacks or flashbacks of her dead dad or whatever. Sid's all like, yeah, this isn't a movie, and then Billy's all like, of course it is. It's all one big movie, It's just a matter of how you take it. And then what's her name? Like Sid's all like, why can't my life be a Meg Ryan movie, like a third-rate porno or whatever? And so then, Sid decides, because she loves Billy so much, that she's about to have sex with him. Ooh. And so we're going against this trope of, like, virgins will always live till the end. So, like, because she ain't about to be a virgin no more. And so then, they have sex on his parents' bed, which is, like, really disrespectful. But you have that whole kind of scene. So, and it's really interesting because then the next scene we have is the rules speech that Randy Meeks is like delivering. Be like, there are certain rules that you need to follow in order to survive a horror movie. Number one, you can never have sex, and you can never do this, and all that. We all know the drill. And you can't ever say, I'll be right back. And then, like, Stu says, like, hey, you want a beer? You're like, I'll be right back. You have that whole kind of thing. Gail and Kenny in there, after the rules speech, they're in the news van, they're watching this, and then she's all like, I'm going to go and, like, she's going to go do something. She's going to take a walk or get some fresh air. But I think Dewey by that point had actually come up and was like, oh, hey, like, there's this car that's out there and I was going to take a look at it. You want to go walk with me? And they're all like, yeah, sure, why not? In the meantime, while they're watching Halloween, like, on this, like, downstairs, it's cutting back to Sid and Billy having sex, or, like, stripping their clothes off to, like, about to have sex, which I thought was really good. I thought the music that was used was really, really well done. So you have that whole thing. You also then have Gail saying, I'll be right back, which also sets up that, oh, no, is she going to die? But she doesn't. So you have that scene. Then you have the scene of, so after you see the cutting from Billy and Stu, pre-coitus, you then have this, it's a shot of Jamie Kennedy answering the phone. Randy's answering the phone. He learns that Principal Hembry has died. It uses the Halloween music really well. So they're watching Halloween downstairs while the Halloween is playing. And so the call comes up. And it's really creepy because they use this music while, Randy is talking about, like, listen, they found Principal Hembry, like, gutted and, like, posted on the goalpost at the football field or whatever. And then, of course, these, like, just sardonic ass teenagers are like, well, we gotta go see it before, like, they take him down. And there's, like, a bunch of pieces of shit, pretty much. So then, the teens, they get in their cars and they're just, like, driving, and they're probably, like, a little tipsy too. So this is just so dangerous. And so then you have, you have that. And then you have Dewey and Gail. They're walking down the road. They're getting to know each other a little bit. That's when you find out that Dewey's name is Dwight. And then, Gail's talking about, like, well, what about a name like Gail Weathers? I sound like I'm a meteorologist or whatever. And then they almost get run down by these teens, which is kind of crazy. I love how Dewey says, like, freeze! But they're not going to, they can't hear him. So they have that whole thing. And then Dewey and Gail, they kiss while they're sitting, and, while they're laying there in the grass. And then, like, they find the car. They find Neil Prescott's car, I believe, just kind of randomly there in the woods. So you're like, oh no, something's going on. So by this point, you're like, oh my god, who's the killer? Because you're kind of thinking, like, oh, maybe it's not Stu, or it's not Stu and it's not Billy, maybe, but, like, who else could it be? Maybe it is her dad, right? So then you have Sid and Billy, their post-sex conversation. So, Sydney's asking, like, who'd you call when you were in the police station? Because you know how they give you a call? Be like, who's your call? And then he's all like, I called my dad. And then, Sydney's all like, no, you didn't. Like, but Sheriff Burke called your dad. I saw him. Like, this whole thing. And so she pretty much just saying, like, I just think it'd be an interesting way to kind of throw me off, if you use your call to call me. And then, Billy's all like, what do I have to do to make you feel like I'm not a killer? And then in the meantime, when you see this, like you see Ghostface coming in through the room, and then Billy gets stabbed. Ooh, no, this is happening. So then Ghostface and Sydney have a chase scene where, like, she's getting chased all over the house, up in the, upstairs and all that. And it's real tense and all this, and it's really scary. So then she goes into this one, like, attic area. She has this, like, long hallway kind of thing where there's, like, a window at the end. And she's all like, bitch, I gotta get out of here. So then, she goes out the window. And she's like kind of hanging on the side of the house. She's like, all right, I'll figure this out. But then Ghostface comes up behind her and says, boo, bitch. And so then she falls out of she falls out the window, but thankfully she falls onto a boat and then she just falls on the ground, which, at least the boat impacted her fall. So then you have that. And this is when Sid finds Tatum's body. And so then you have the scene with Randy is saying, he's watching Halloween, and he's just like talking, he's just like drunk, I guess, and he's just like, behind you, Jamie, behind you. And so while this is happening, you see Ghostface just like walking, skulking, behind this couch where Randy's sitting. And then it's just really funny because they just, I guess, got very lucky because they just so happened to cast a guy named Jamie, and Jamie Lee Curtis is the star of Halloween that he's talking to, because he's drunk. And so, that whole scene is just really funny where he's just saying, behind you, Jamie, behind you. And he's almost like he's talking to himself. So then you have, nobody can hear, Sydney, but like, ooh, she's going to like run to the news van. She's all like, ooh, no, I'm scared. So then Kenny's there and, she's just like, come save me, pretty much. Or she's just like, there's somebody trying to kill me. And then, they're watching the video that Gail had left the video camera, and they see Ghostface in the house and be like, oh no, like he's going to kill somebody. And, he does, and he ends up running out of the house. And then you see Kenny gets killed. He gets his throat slashed, which is really sad. And then Sid runs away. So she gets out of the news van and all that. And she's just like, no, bitch, I got to get away. So then Dewey and Gail run back, and they're just like running back, and they come back to Stu's house. And you see Dewey go into the house with his gun drawn, and he's just like going around like a scared ass guy, which I would be too. And so he's just like going and seeing like who's in the house, and but he's scared out of his wits probably. So then while Dewey's doing that and Gail, is just kind of hanging out there, she goes back to her news van. She's finding blood, and she finds a lot of it. And so she's like, oh, bitch, what's going on? What happened to my news van? So then she's like, she finds blood, and she tries to like leave. She's trying to like get the ignition started on her news van, and then it just so happens Randy stumbles across her, and then she has this phone where she's like trying to call somebody, and she just like hits him with the phone, which is a lot of hitting with the phone for whatever reason in this movie, but like hits him with the phone, so he's like kind of made out, or he's been kind of not knocked out, but he's been incapacitated. And so then Gail tries to drive away, but she's just like, what the hell's going on with this window? And so she sees, like, when she puts the windshield wipers on, that it's actually blood. And then Kenny's body, like, literally just kind of, I think, backs up. And then when she backs up and accelerates, like, the body of Kenny just, like, kind of slumps onto the windshield. And so then, she's trying to drive away, but Kenny's body's on top. And then she's just like, Kenny, whatever, but get off my fucking windshield. So then, Gail's just driving away. She's just like, oh my God, I gotta get out of here. And so she tries to drive away. But then Sydney tries to flag Gail down, but then Gail kind of runs off the road and hits a tree. So, like, oh no, Gail, like, what's going on? And that was actually not planned, apparently. So it was planned that this van was going to like actually roll when it like crashed off the road, but it didn't. And instead it just kind of hit into a tree, but it worked a lot better, I think. All right, so then we got Ghostface. He's chasing after Sydney, and Sydney's running. She's just like, "Oh no, I gotta leave." So then she comes across this police car. I believe it was Dewey's police car, maybe, that was sitting there, and she's locked herself in the police car. But then Ghostface comes up, and he's just like, "Boo, bitch!" And so then Ghostface is trying to kill Sydney, because then what happens is, like, she's just, like, locked herself in the car, but, like, she can't go anywhere because the Ghostface has the keys. And so she's all like, okay, I gotta get out of here, and this guy just, like, kind of swoops away and goes away. And then she sees the dispatcher radio, and she's just like, please somebody come, like, this is the address I'm at, like, it's Stu Macher's house, like, somebody's trying to kill me, he's gonna try and kill me. And so then Ghostface does try to kill somebody, comes up through the back of the police cruiser, because he has the keys, he can do that, I guess. And so then tries to kill Sid, but then she escapes out of the police car. She runs back to the house. This is where you see Sydney and Randy and Stu all together. So Randy's, like, limping. He's like, Sid, like, we got to get out of here. And then we have Stu being like, he killed Tatum, he killed all of them, da da da, and they're blaming each other, and they're trying to kind of do this. And then, I love when Sydney's just, like, pointing the gun at both of them, and then she's just like, fuck you both. She goes in the house. And by this point, Billy falls down the stairs, because at this point he had been stabbed, and it's, like, all freaking scary. So they get together and be like, oh my god, Billy, like, we have to, do something, like, I gotta leave. So then you see that it's, I think you then open the door, and then, like, Randy just, like, runs into the little foyer area, and, you see that, they're just like, we gotta get out of here, and then Billy just shoots Randy, and then you start to see, like, oh, this is what we're now seeing. And so then, because I think what Randy said was, like, he's gone mad, and then Billy's like, we all go a little mad sometimes. And he shoots Randy, and, Sid's just like, oh no, Randy. And then, then Billy just starts, listing these references. Anthony Perkins, Psycho. And then he, like, takes the blood that he, like, apparently is bleeding out, and he, like, licks on it and sucks his finger, and he's like, corn syrup. Same stuff they used as blood in Carrie. And so then this is when you find the whole thing of the killers. So you find out Billy and Stu are revealed to be the killers, because then you see Stu and he's like, surprise, Sydney. And personally, I mean, you can kind of read into it that, like, Billy and Stu, I mean, must be somewhat super gay for each other. Like, I don't know. The way they look, I think the way that Stu looks at Billy is, like, a whole thing, and he's really into it. And so they have this whole kind of, like, really creepy, when you think about it, kind of conversation with, Sydney, where, they pretty much are talking about, like, I think she wants a motive. Maybe we don't have a motive, Sid. Like, did Hannibal Lecter ever really explain why he likes to eat people? Didn't think so. And it's all this kind of thing. And you pretty much find out that Billy... So Maureen Prescott had an affair with Billy's dad, and that was the motive for the killings. It's one of the suspected motives. And, like, that whole thing happens, and somehow they're, like, gonna plan to frame Sid's dad for the murders. They're doing it on the anniversary of Maureen's murder. So they kidnapped Mr. Prescott, Neil Prescott. So when you think about it, I mean, it really probably was the fact that, like, whole story, Neil was there on a Friday or whatever, being like, well, I'm leaving, honey. Like, and then at some point they just, like, kidnapped her dad, probably while, Sydney was sleeping or something that night, and then has just been barricading him at the house for all this time, which is kind of crazy. And there is a scene where Billy says, why? Why? And this, like, whole scene just reminds me of Rebecca Gayheart in Urban Legend. If you know, we'll talk about it on another episode. But there's just, like, the scene in there. But yeah, so it just reminds me of that. Which is funny because I think Urban Legend was definitely... inspired by Scream, obviously, so it's interesting that, like, I think maybe there was some little bit of inspiration there, perhaps. But anyway, so yeah, then Billy and Stu, like, stab each other. It's, like, slightly, maybe kind of homoerotic, kind of, but they just stab each other. So, like, Billy stabs Stu, and then Stu stabs Billy. He goes a little too deep, I think. And so then, they're just bleeding out because they're supposed to be left for dead. And then, Sydney's just like, you sick fucks, you've seen one too many movies. And so then you see this whole thing, they stabbed each other at this point, and the gun disappears because Stu was about to get the gun and like kind of, plant it on Neil Prescott, but then you see that Gail is about to shoot the boys, and then she's all like being a bad bitch, but then she found out the safety was on, and so then they kind of like kick her, and then she like gets knocked unconscious for a little bit. And then while they don't shoot Gail for whatever reason, but then like Billy cracks his neck, which is like really gross, kind of. And apparently he just kind of did that. Like Skeet Ulrich just did that as part of the scene, which I thought was really good. But yeah, they decide not to just like shoot. Or I think what it was that Billy was getting ready to shoot like Gail and Dewey pretty much. But like, because Dewey at this point is like stabbed in the back, and like he's just laying out on the porch at this palatial ass mansion that Stu and his parents live at, and so that whole thing. Then you see that Sydney has disappeared before Billy can shoot Gail, because even they're all like, Stu, I thought you said she was dead. Billy, she looked dead. So then, you have that scene where Sydney disappears before Billy can shoot Gail. And so, like, we'll go look for her. And then Sydney calls the phone, and, she's all like, being an iconic queen. This is literally what I said. Sydney calls the phone and is an iconic queen because she's all like, guess who, called the police and reported your sorry ass, and, all this. And so then Billy's just going crazy. He's like ripping everything up, being like, you bitch, you bitch, you bitch. And so, that whole thing happens. And then Stu gets on the phone, and he's just like, I'm much too sensitive for this. So he says something like this. And he's like, did you really call the police? And, Sydney's talking about like, Billy had a motive, but what's your motive? Like, I'm much too, sensitive to peer pressure. He's like, did you really call the police? Be like, you bet your sorry ass I did. And he's all like, my mom and dad are going to be so mad at me. And that whole thing, it's just like really darkly funny. That whole scene with Billy and Stu is just fucking scary when you think about it, because they're pretty much talking about like how they raped and murdered Maureen the year before, and it's just like really fucking scary and creepy. And you're just like, dude, you're talking to this woman's daughter. Like, it's just really crazy. So then in the meantime, you have the Halloween movie playing in the background. It's adding to the scene because it's kind of like, the sound effects with Jamie Lee in there, and like the music and all that. It's just really, really good. I thought it was very good. So then, Billy's like skulking around. He's looking for Sydney. He looks in the closet, and then she stabs him with this umbrella, like one of those like, tip umbrellas or whatever. So then Sydney fights with, so she stabs Billy. She then fights with Stu, and then, like, I always had a thing for you, Sydney. And so then, like, they fight, and then she drops the TV right on his head, bitch, and she kills him. So then Randy reappears. So Randy be like, oh my God, Randy, I thought you were dead. And so Randy reappears, and Billy then still tries to kill Sydney because he's not dead quite yet. And so then Gail, just comes in and is badass, and she shoots Billy finally. And Gail, Randy, and Sid are left as the survivors. Oh, and Mr. Prescott, I guess. So then you have that. So then, they kind of have this moment where, like, be careful. This is the moment where, this is the end of the movie where, like, this is like the end of the movie where, like, the killer comes back for one final scare. And then you have this, like, Billy's about to do something. Then, like, she just double taps and shoots him in the head. And it's great. And she says, not in my movie. And she's just being an icon, which I love. So then you see Sid shoots Billy in the head, like I said, and then Sid's dad's still alive. So, like, she's like, Daddy. And so she's like, let's get you out of here. So then Dewey is put into an ambulance. He was actually supposed to die in the original script, but he does not. They put him in the ambulance. He seems okay. And then you see Gail Weathers kind of getting herself primped to do this report where she talked about a personal eyewitness report of this. And then you see this, like, beautiful sunset, because you got to think this happened all night. So they're literally doing this in the morning. This is all happening, and they're about to do this, like, news report about what actually happened with the whole Ghostface killings and all of that. And then that's when the movie comes to an end. Kind of goes without saying that this film in particular is definitely a very beloved horror film of its time. It was definitely influential for a lot of other horror films that came out of it. From this, I mean, the stars of this movie went into stardom after this. Neve Campbell was able to be in the sequels, of course. And then, of course, Courtney Cox and David Arquette were also in the sequels. They then got married. They are since now divorced, but they did get married. They met on this movie. Rose McGowan had a really good career in Hollywood before she decided to leave Hollywood. Matthew Lillard's still working. Skeet Ulrich is still working. Kevin Williamson was able to make I Know What You Did Last Summer after this. He also was able to finally create, Teaching Mrs. Tingle, even though it's not a great movie. He was able to do that as his first directorial movie. He really did a lot. And he then created Dawson's Creek, which went on for 6 seasons on the WB. It was a very popular show at the time. And really got a great career out of it, So he kind of did exactly what he wanted to do. It was kind of because of this movie Scream where really everybody involved really got something great out of it. So many people love it because it is self-referential, it's meta, which is why some people don't like it. But overall, I think it's still a pretty freaky, scary time. It has that kind of comedy in there, which some people can appreciate and enjoy. And I just think it's such a good horror movie. It really helped revitalize the genre that is horror. It made a whole lot of imitators after it. I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, all these kinds of movies that came after it. But I do think this one stands alone as that kind of penultimate, 90s horror movie, if you will. Currently, right now, you can stream Scream all over the place. I think it is on Paramount Plus still. You can also get it. You can get a 3-film Blu-ray of it, like I have, which it has Scream 1, 2, and 3. It's got some behind the features, it has all the commentary tracks for each film, I think. That also has a bonus disc where it has Scream the Inside Story and then Still Screaming, which is another documentary where I got a lot of the information, the fun fact stuff from, and production history and all that. So yeah, I definitely recommend Scream if you haven't already seen it. If you haven't already seen it, I don't know if you've been living under a rock or, you just got a Prime Video subscription yesterday or whatever, but I definitely highly recommend it. And I think it's definitely worth your time for sure. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so by emailing cultcinemacircle@gmail.com. If you want to give any movie recommendations, give feedback on the show, or if you just want to say, hey girl, hey, I'm open to all of it. You can also follow Cult Cinema Circle on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. Instagram handle is Cult Cinema Circle. Twitter handle is Cult Cinecircle. On those platforms, I tend to post when new episodes release. I'll post what the next episode is going to be. I make Instagram stories with little fun facts and all that, and just general fun stuff over there. And on Letterboxd, you can find me at Jesse, Jesse, Kremp, Kremp, all one word. On there, I tend to log the movies that I've been watching. I write little reviews about them, and just general foolishness over there. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast on your podcatcher of choice. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, or wherever you like to listen to your favorite podcasts. I make it pretty easy for you to find the show. Be sure to leave 5 stars and a 1 to 2 sentence review. It helps get people to see the show more, and it helps more people find the show in general. As always, thank you for taking the time to listen to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. And remember, Billy and his penis don't deserve you. Take care. Bye.